he was told when he walked into the Pentagon that there was an extraterrestrial human person in the cafeteria. And he said it was right around the time that Val Thor was sitting in Howard Menger's backyard. Now, Howard Menger is another contactee of the 1960s. And the famous picture of Val Thor with Jill and with Don are three extraterrestrials that are sitting in the backyard watching Howard Menger with his first wife sitting there lecturing.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my pleasure to welcome back Paola Harris to Exopolitics Today. Welcome, Paola.
Oh, it's a pleasure for me too. I always like talking with you, and it's so important that we get some of this information out.
Well, I know you had a lot to do with Clifford Stone, who is one of the people that actually inspired me to get involved in the exopolitics field. I remember him back from 2001 when he spoke at Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project press conference. That was really very powerful, and he really did kind of like address this issue of extraterrestrial life visiting, and it was a very powerful thing. And I know you had a lot to do with him. You met him in 1997. So before we talk about his Disclosure Project press conference talk, why don't you just kind of like explain how you met Clifford Stone and why you found his testimony so compelling?
Well, I'm going to also add that I helped with the Disclosure Project. I was living in Italy at the time, because I was living in Italy from 1992. I came back in 2007. So I helped with all the military people that Stephen was interviewing, but I wasn't aware of Clifford Stone. And that came later because I went to the 50th anniversary of the Roswell incident, and that's where I saw Colonel Corso. That's where I met him. I was covering the day after Roswell. So everybody was there. It was a big party. I mean, everybody, Michael Hesselman, John Mack, Whitley Strieber, all of them, Bud Hopkins, everybody was there. And I remember being in the media room, and this man came up and he asked everybody there, all of the researchers, and they were all very well known. He said, "Would you like to come to my house? I have something to share with you." And they knew who Clifford Stone was before I did. So the only people that he accepted the invitation were Vittorio Paccaccini and me. Vittorio Paccaccini is a Brazilian researcher who did the Virginia case. And he was there to talk about the Virginia case in Roswell, there at the auditorium. And we were the two foreign journalists. So we went, nobody else went. And so we went to Clifford's house, and you'll see it in one of the clips. And he had stacks of papers everywhere. And we sat down, and I didn't know what he did exactly. But what he did was throw all of this microfilm and a big canister on his coffee table. And my job at the time, I was working for Maurizio Baiada in Italy, was just to film and to interview. So when I saw this big canister, I just filmed everything, and then I sent everything off FedEx to my boss, to Maurizio. Well, when he called me from Italy, he said, "Paola," he said, "Do you know what was on that coffee table?" I said, "No." He said, "The Holloman landing. It was in the sticker that was on the front, and the sticker was coming off." And I said, "What is that?" I didn't know what it was at the time. And he explained to me the meeting with Eisenhower. So I called Clifford right away, and this people should understand. And I said, "Why didn't you tell me that was what you threw there with all the microfilm that was there in packages?" And he said, "Because it was a test." He said, "The intelligence community said to me, go tell the people that come here, the so-called researchers, that to come to your house so you have something to show them and see who shows up. And if they ask to see it, let them see it. And it was the first, he said, 8 minutes. It's just the leader, the first 8 minutes. Well, stupid Paula, I didn't realize because I didn't know, because I didn't have that kind of background. If I had asked, I could have seen it. He had it all set up. So I said, but you're my friend. I said, why didn't you tell me? And he said, basically, they came and took it the next day. It was a test. And I said, could you tell me what was on it? And then he said, and this will help your listeners. He said, everything that was on it, including what the beings look like, is in a film, the Emanager film, UFOs, past, present, and future. He said, or it's called It Has Begun. So part of my exopolitics classes with you is to ask the students to watch It Has Begun, because it has the Holloman landing. Not only that, it has, and the way they do it is, suppose they came to speak to our government, but it's not a suppose. They took it from that, and there is a 30-minute clip of a UFO coming down. Looks like a circular craft, metal, and that is real. That is from the Holloman landing, and that was given to Emanager to put in there.
You want to just explain to my audience how Clifford Stone got all this incredible information? Talk a little bit about his career in the Army and what happened.
Well, this happens with a lot of contactees. He was in Mississippi, and he had contact. He thought it was an invisible child, invisible friend, with a being whom his mother and his family understood, because he used to sit at the table with them and so forth. And Clifford could see the being. He was interacting with the being that he calls Corona. And he said, I thought he was a little boy like me, he said. And what would happen, he said, is that Corona would watch my emotions. I said, what does Corona look like? He said, well, he's about 4 feet tall. And believe it or not, Paula, he has greenish skin. And he said when he was a child, he looked like a child. When Clifford got bigger, he saw what Corona really looked like. But Clifford developed special abilities. And I have talked to so many whistleblowers who have been discovered by the military intelligence, including Michael Wolff, for having special abilities. So in order to make money, Clifford's mother used to charge $10 for a reading because he could see the future. He was clairvoyant. He was clairsentient. As a kid, I said, how old were you when she did that? He goes, well, I was about 11 or 12, and my mother used to charge our neighbors. And I said, somebody noticed, didn't they? He said, yes, because he said, when I was 14, I tried to buy a UFO magazine. He said, that's when I met the Colonel. And if you read Clifford's book, Eyes Only, talks about the same man that followed him most of his life. And the Colonel knew that Clifford wanted to buy the magazine, but there were also Playboy and adult magazines there, and Clifford couldn't go in. So the Colonel said, I'll go in and buy the magazine for you. And then when Clifford went to graduate, he had been an ROTC, wanted to be in the Army. Now we have to remember the Army, Air Force, and Navy, because Colonel Corso was also an Army. And he went to sign up, but the office there in Mississippi, where he was, said, no, you can't qualify because you have scoliosis, you have back problems. So he was devastated because he really wanted to join the Army. So the clerks left the office and the Colonel walked in. And he said, son, do you really want to join the Army? And Clifford said, yes, I wanted to do that. And the Colonel signed the papers. And from that point on, Clifford thought he was a clerk, but he trained for nuclear biological cleanup, which means, a bomb or any kind of nuclear accident. What he didn't understand was that it was more than a nuclear biological cleanup. Because in 1969, they asked him to go to Indiantown Gap, Indiana. Now, I know how many crashes. He's worked on 12, 3 of them on Vietnam. I know the details. The last one he worked on in the United States was in Georgia. And but he didn't know what he was doing. I mean, he went to a site, they called you, he said you could be eating dinner. You know, for the Vietnam one, it was Christmas time, and they called him and they put a blindfold on him and flew him across the ocean, and he knew he landed in the Mekong Delta because he was in Vietnam and married a Vietnamese woman. But this first one was a shocker because I think he said he was only, in 1969, I think he said he was only 18 years old, and he goes to this place where he thinks a plane crashed. He tells this in the Disclosure Project, detailed. He says, we set up the light-alls, I could see something, we started to go close to it. He said, as we started to go close to it, all my buddies backed away until I was the only one, he said, and I saw two gray bodies in a hatch, and he starts to cry because Clifford, every time he remembers something, he lives it. And he said, I need an officer down here. And people should listen to the Disclosure Project testimony. I need an officer down here. And they said, no, son, just go up and tell us what you see. And we're dealing with telepathic abilities. And so he went and told them, he said, they were all four of them were dead, two were inside, two were on the outside, in 1969. So of course my mind's being blown. Everybody's just stuck on Roswell, and they don't understand that there are so many events. There is a book by Ryan Wood called Magic Eyes Only that has 92 separate events. And so, you know, he said it was traumatic, but from that point on, he knew that he was part of a secret unit that went to do these things. And I can tell you more stories about the Vietnam ones, which just are really interesting. But Michael, if I can slowly share the screen, I think.
Well, before you do that, I just wanted to kind of like just give a little bit more context for the viewers, just so that they know that. So in 1969, Clifford Stone enlists in the army because an officer, you said a colonel, or I remember it was a captain, but anyway, it was an officer, encouraged Clifford to join the army. He joins the army, he's 18 years old, but then even though he's trained, he gets trained to be, his official job is as a clerk. I mean, they call it MOS, Military Occupation Specialty, was as a clerk, but he gets trained in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare, and he is then taken into this top secret Air Force unit dealing with crash retrievals all around the planet, and so he goes to Vietnam. So I just wanted to kind of give people that background, so that gives them a context for what they now are going to hear in the Disclosure Project press conference that you're going to play, where he talked about those early crash retrieval operations that he was involved in.
Yes, but let's remember it's Army, because he said it's Army. So, and actually the cover of his book is that. So yeah, okay. So what they asked him, I will add one little thing, Michael. The only reason he came forward is that he had 5 children, a set of twins, 2 boys, and one of them was killed. Yeah, Robert was killed. It was a motorcycle accident, but Clifford thought that it was done on purpose. So that gave him the courage to come forward. Otherwise, he would have never done it. And so he told Stephen Greer's people, and I'm going to play the clip for you. When they asked about the ETs, what Clifford said was, and he had told me that he had categorized 57 different varieties, and I asked him why, and he said to me, because we had a manual that had 57 different varieties, and we had to know how to give them first aid. So I said, you like turned the pages and saw different drawings? And he said, yes. So this is a question he's being asked.
with this. This is an international peace issue and an international security issue, and it should be taken up by the UN Security Council, and of course we are recommending that as well. Yes, sir.
So I think my question is actually to Clifford Stone. You said that you had seen aliens on a craft that had crashed. I wondered if you could describe what they looked like.
I could, but it would probably take a whole lot of time. The reason I state that, when I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But apparently we got quite a few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance. And that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
Yes, and
Yeah, just explain to the audience why that was important. Why you wanted to share that.
Share because the way that I work with people is I'd rather that all my books and everything that comes out of their mouth, that it's not my opinion, and that I want to share exactly what they said. Most of my books are word for word. So what happened with Clifford Stone is, everybody asks, how do you know there's 57 different species? And I said this before. With Colonel Corso, he told me 52 were categorized. And he said, but we're just worried about who made them. We think they look exactly like us, he said. So here's a colonel in the Army telling me this, and there's Clifford Stone telling me that he had a first aid manual. Now that makes sense. I mean, you go to a crash, he said the ones in Vietnam, he said looked very, very much amphibian. He said they had gills. They were tall. They were about 4 to 5 feet. They were taller than the regular, beings. And he said they looked at almost amphibian. He said, so you have, what we've done in the fields is say reptilians, grays, and Nordics. And what do you call the Virginia being there? That in Virginia, in Brazil, I mean, that little thing had protuberances out of his head. He had reddish skin, big eyes. So I think that it's important. What do I want to specify that? Because maybe the first thing we should do is clean our minds from a lot of the mythology and look at who the people that actually work with this. And of course, it makes sense. Clifford said another thing, Michael, that you might be interested in. He said so many retrievals were done that anymore they had enough bodies and they used to leave them out for their own to come and get them the next day. So the one in Georgia, that's what they did. I said, you mean the beings come and retrieve the bodies? And he said, yes.
So he read, or he was given this manual when he went on these missions, and I think he, as I recall, he kind of said that manual was given to him, like I think 1979, as I recall, and he said that first aid manual contained information on 57 humanoid species, and that he was trained because he was part of the kind of like the first team that would go into one of these crashed UFOs, and because he would encounter injured extraterrestrials, that he was trained to give them some kind of first aid in case they needed it, because they wanted to help keep these beings alive, because obviously they wanted to interrogate them and find out how the craft operated and learn about the technologies and so forth. So I thought that manual that he talked about was very interesting, and that in the 1970s they knew that there were 57 species visiting, interacting with humanity, and they knew enough about their biology so that they could come up with this manual.
Exactly. And who would know this were crash recovery teams. He wasn't the only one. He told me that there was several on the crew with him. What's interesting for me is the idea of coming to get your own, because as you know, in the Trinity case, the Trinity book that Jacques and I wrote, the next day the beings were...
Maybe you should just explain who Jacques is.
Okay, Jacques Vallée and I wrote a book called Trinity. Jacques Vallée is the French scientist. He's depicted as a French scientist in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And in that crash, the little boys saw the beings, and then the father and the boys went back the next day, and the beings were no longer there. And so I had mentioned that to Cliff, and he said, well, yeah, they come and get their own. They come and get their own. And then he told me about another incident in the Pentagon, if you want me to talk about that.
Yeah, so he's really affirming that the extraterrestrials have a similar policy to, say, the US Air Force. If a plane crashes, that they actually send teams to retrieve the pilot, that they actually have specially trained teams that can go and retrieve, search and rescue of crashed pilots. That the extraterrestrials have a similar program, but it's kind of like galactic, that if one of their craft crashes on a planet, that they send a search and rescue team to locate and retrieve the injured pilot.
Yeah, that sounds like a good description. When he did the Disclosure Project, and people really see the whole testimony there, he said he let one of the beings go, but he never gave details. And so I, in all these years, and of course I published his book, I asked him for details on that. I said, first of all, what was this being doing in the Pentagon? And second of all, what were you doing there? And he said, Paula, often, he said, because of the telepathy, they would call me in, and he said, this being was sitting at a table. And if you listen to the Disclosure Project testimony, Clifford breaks down in the middle and he says, and the being said, I am scared. And he said, I could feel his fear. And I said, why was he scared? To my surprise, it was not for his own life, it was for the people in the room. He said that the being said that when his own came to get him, it might cause a problem with the being, with the humans, because they may use a technology that is dangerous. So he asked Clifford to let him go. And so Clifford said he understood. He took wire cutters, cut the fence, and let the being go. He told the military there that he had to speak to the being privately, and he let him go. So at the Disclosure Project testimony, he was accused of treason. He said that the colonel said to him, you aided and abetted the enemy. And Clifford's answer was, I thought he was our guest. I thought he was our guest. And the military men said to him, you are never to do that again. And Clifford said, if I had another chance, I would do that again. But what I didn't understand is that it's also very dangerous to interact with that kind of situation. And the being was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for the people in the room. I will end with saying that in the last part of his life, he did the interaction. He said the beings he thinks are benign. They're not, he said he never felt they were hostile. And I have to add that comes from him, not me.
Yeah, can you, so that incident, where did that occur? where he kind of like released one of these extraterrestrials, and we're talking. Was it a particular type of extraterrestrial, or?
He said it was like a medium gray, and it was at the Pentagon. He said Pentagon. So I'm going, if they're alive, where do they end up? And he said it. So I'm thinking, okay, well, and we can't say that the people that are at the Pentagon know about this, because we're dealing with 1970s. And we have a whole different cast of characters who are in the Pentagon now. It's just like I got affirmation that a Val Thor type person was in the Pentagon from George Filer, who was told that. So the thing is that we have to, like
maybe you should just kind of back up and say who George Filer is and what that what he confirmed about an extraterrestrial at the Pentagon.
Okay, I was doing cases on the early contactees, and I went to New Jersey to meet George Filer, who was a pilot in the 50s and 60s. And he worked as a courier for Curtis LeMay. He was a courier for General Curtis LeMay, who was at the Pentagon. And George Filer may be known to people as Filer's Files, if you get Filer's Files. And George Filer personally told me in June of last year that he was told when he walked into the Pentagon that there was an extraterrestrial human person in the cafeteria. And he said it was right around the time that Val Thor was sitting in Howard Menger's backyard. Now, Howard Menger is another contactee of the 1960s. And the famous picture of Val Thor with Jill and with Don are three extraterrestrials that are sitting in the backyard watching Howard Menger with his first wife sitting there lecturing. And I can answer any questions about that particular situation because that is what I was researching.
Okay, so this is important because George Filer, I think he was a major in the US Air Force, and he goes into the Pentagon and he actually saw Val Thor in an area of the Pentagon. Did he see him, or was he told that Val Thor was there?
Said he was told that Val Thor was there. He was told by the people on his way to Curtis LeMay. They said there is somebody in the cafeteria who is not from here, an extraterrestrial. Of course, I asked him, could you go in there and see? And he said no. He said no. It was very what do you call it? It was very
classified.
You can't walk around the Pentagon where you want to walk. He was on his way. He said he was the courier, which meant he had a leather briefcase with a chain around his arm. He used to deliver messages to Curtis LeMay.
Okay, and Curtis LeMay, of course, was the former, or maybe at the time, he was the Air Force Chief of Staff, so very senior official, and Major George Filer at the time was delivering messages, and he was told that Valiant Thor was there at the Pentagon. So that's really important corroboration for that story. So okay, so let's get back to Clifford Stone then. So he's doing all these crash retrieval operations, and I recall he did 12 during his 22-year career. So you mentioned, anything you want to say about those 12 crash retrievals he did, apart from Vietnam?
Well, Vietnam was the one that really struck me because that was the Christmas time. His family was very upset with Clifford because they didn't want him doing these kinds of things. And it was Christmas, and he was pulled out of his house, and he was flown to Vietnam. And he said that what the commission was to blow up a cave that had these extraterrestrials. I said amphibian looking. And he said when he walked into the cave, they went in with explosives. When he went into the cave on one wall was totally transparent. So those beings were watching the war. And they turned around. One of them turned around and said, "What are you doing here, Clifford?" It's in his book. And Clifford said they had no choice but to blow up the cave. But he realized that they were very much involved in watching the Vietnam War. And he had 2 other incidences in Vietnam. And so when I asked him, "What do you think they're doing in these war zones?" he said, "They are watching us in conflict," he said, because he said, "To me, they're cosmic anthropologists, which means they're watching conflicts." He said he barely survived that time because he had a detached retina, but something happened and his retina was cured or fixed. And he gives them credit because they knew he was a contactee.
Okay. All right. So what did you do with Clifford when you visited his home? You said you did a video clip that you wanted to show us where you kind of like got to interview him for the last time. So you want to tell us a little bit about this video clip that you want to show?
Well, yes, I wanted confirmation for what he thought the beings were like, number one. Number two, he had a piece of a crash retrieval he had put in his boot. And he had shown it to me many times. I have photographs of it if people want to see it. And he told me that when he died, and he died soon after that, I would get all his files and the piece. Now, about a week before he died, 2 men drove up to his door with a black van and said, "Paola Harris sent us to get your files." And and Clifford, as he's used to, looked at these men with the black van and took a gun and said, "She did not send you here. So leave right away." So it was very tricky because when he died, I had a friend go down there and box up 23 different boxes, which were sent to Rice University. So I have to tell your listeners that Clifford Stone's files and everything I collected, all the audio, video, is at Rice University. And I could never find the piece. He never told me where it was. He said that one of his friends had it or something, but I was never, ever able to retrieve the piece. And, you know, what did he die of? Pancreatic cancer, which is the same thing that Michael Wolff died of. So it's been very painful. He doesn't look well. So I'm going to screen share and let you hear what he said. It's a very short clip. And I did as much as I could because I wanted to capture him. So I'm going to share this clip with all of you. And let me see here. I want to go back to the beginning. So here.
Holes? Yes. Okay, there are 2 types, and then one of them they were very upset about me learning a little bit more about. 2 types of propulsion systems they use. One is an antimatter propulsion system. We're using that one. There's real time involved. For example, to get from that 100 years away, 100 light years away from us, using antimatter, it takes approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes to get from there to Earth, or to get from Earth to there. Now, if they use negative matter, and that was something they did not want me to know too much about and did not want me to dabble too much in. If you use negative matter, then the time element's no longer there. Because
is that 0 point energy? Is that called 0 point?
Yeah, well, they consider both of them 0 point energy, but that one right there, it truly is. I mean, that that 100 or an hour and 40 minutes no longer exists. You get here like standing on this side of the doorway, stepping on the other side. If it's 100 light years, same thing. It doesn't differ. And can you manually do that? Yeah, you can. Can you go ahead and just think about it? There are species who can just think about it. And, yeah, no, yeah. And the whole situation is there's that psychic connection that has to take place between the craft and the entity. So it does happen.
What about Corona? Can we get here in minutes?
Corona is a very highly advanced individual, or should I say, highly advanced species. Because I was always worried about if you get captured, what?
Yeah.
And he says they can never capture me.
Because he's a dimensional species.
And, yeah, he can go through dimensions.
He goes through, but he doesn't come on a spacecraft.
Oh, I told you the story about where I got to the point where I was not real happy about. We lived right here, and that was the table right in here.
Yeah.
That I decided, all this has to be by imagination. It's not doing me any good. The family's getting upset with what I'm doing, and I need to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And Corona said, you were selected for a reason. I says, you're not even real. When he sat near, I said, yeah, but you're a figment of my imagination. And he says, oh, am I? He picks a plate up and he drops it on the floor. And my wife sitting there by that time, I was asking, did you see anybody sitting in this chair? Are you crazy? No, I don't see no one in that chair. And when
see the plate?
Huh?
You told her to look at the plate.
No, she saw it and she's giving me heck because she felt that I was upset and threw it on the floor.
Oh.
Then I said, that doesn't mean a thing. He picked up another plate. At this time, I turned around. Here's a plate just floating in the air. So I grabbed it real quick and she, what caused that? I guess the wind. No, really, what caused that? And of course, immediately, she's older now, but she felt a ghost. And I tried to just downplay it.
So he's had problems with his family not believing. The example of the plate is fantastic because, when they are dimensional beings, and when you deal with that, you think you're going crazy. But that is the physical manifestation of and his wife. She was always, because Clifford used to answer phone at 2 in the morning, at 1 in the morning. There's so many people out there that have talked to Cliff. He thought it was his duty to tell the truth and to talk to everybody. So his own contact, his own ET contact was called Corona. And it's just really interesting. It's interesting because number one, he had courage to come out and tell the truth. He made nothing up. He lost a son, like Michael Wolff lost a son also. And I think that we need to wrap our minds around this because it's very, very complex.
Well, I thought it was interesting in that clip that he talked about, 2 ways that the extraterrestrials can travel 100 light years, using antimatter and dark matter, that they could do it like in an hour and a half in a spacecraft. And then on the other hand, they could kind of like do it through projecting their consciousness, like you just described. So that was interesting that he was acknowledging that. Now I remember interviewing Clifford Stone back around 2005. I think you actually set that up. So that was one of my first interviews with a whistleblower. And I remember him talking to me and telling me about a lot of these things that we've already discussed. But what really kind of like I remember vividly was him saying, look, there's some guys out there behind and they know I'm talking to you. And as soon as we finish this phone call, they're gonna come in here and beat me up for me telling you all this stuff. So I remember him telling me that, and that had a profound impression left a profound impression on me because I'd come across it before. But did you experience that a lot with him?
that I wasn't happy that two men went to his door and said that they were going to take the files because I sent them. I did not send anybody. And why would they use my name? So, Michael, I came to the conclusion that my phone is not private ever, ever, ever. And that somebody has been following my research from day one. So were they able to get the files? No, because I had somebody there when he died, and he died at home, pack up the house in 2 days and get those files out of there. And they were mostly files he got off internet because he had password. He could download, programs and stuff like that. Clifford spent most of his time proving that what he was doing was real, and he felt like he needed to do it with documents. So every time you talk to Clifford, he'd give you DVDs with documents. Now, as far as my career, my involvement with Michael Wolff, where I had two car bombs go off in my apartment, outside my apartment building in Rome, was much more dangerous. Yeah, I mean, they were 3 months apart, and Michael Wolff, for me, was much more dangerous case. However, it wasn't fun hearing these guys try to go and use my name to get the files.
Yeah, Michael Wolff is a very interesting case, and maybe we can talk about him in another interview. Now, Clifford Stone, what I thought was very interesting about him was that, during his army service for, I think it was 22 years, 21 years that he was in the army from 1969 to 1990, something like that, that he was putting out information about the UFO cover-up, and he was punished for that. I remember him being punished for like having that courage to know the truth about what he was involved in, and yet he continued to put it out, even though he was still serving in the army, and there were people that didn't want him to release this information, but he thought it was his duty. So you want to kind of talk about his courage in that way during his military service in releasing information, working with UFO researchers?
Well, his son was killed, and that made a difference. This happened in 1996. Robert, one of the twins, was killed, and when that happens, and that happened with Michael Wolff too. I mean, you get courage because you say, you're not going to do that to me again. We found out it was an accident, but he wants the people to know the Disclosure Project testimony is, we are not alone in the universe. And I thought I should let you know because I was involved in these projects. Now, did he pay a price? Yes, he was probably beat up. His family was not there when he died. Only his wife was there. They did not like the idea that he, his kids were involved in this and didn't want him to be involved. He talked about his family, and then he started to cry and say, I wasn't there for baseball games. I wasn't there for this. I wasn't there for that. That comes from his Disclosure Project testimony, how his family suffered for his job of what he did. And I think he's a hero, but he was also a spiritual man. He was Catholic. On Fridays, he would not eat, he'd fast. He very spiritual, and always believed that human beings should know the truth. So I consider him one of the most valuable whistleblowers. If you want to know about ETs, people should have asked him. He's the one that interacted with them. Some of them were alive. So instead of guessing what ETs are like, but very few people went to see him. As I told you, in the 50th anniversary, nobody went there. Nobody even considered him. They were all doing their own thing.
Well, I know he was actually doing things related to UFOs before his son's death, and that was a factor in what happened. I know he was involved in Freedom of Information Act requests to kind of like extract information and helping researchers find out more about Project Moondust and Project Bluefly. Because Project Moondust was the Air Force term for this crash retrieval operation. And initially, the Air Force denied that such a program existed. And I know he helped various UFO researchers, like I think it was Robert Todd, as I recall, do some Freedom of Information requests. And they found out that Project Moondust was a very real Air Force program. And they kind of gave it a cover for what they were doing. I think it was like to retrieve foreign aircraft that had crashed. But Clifford was saying that, in fact, that was the cover, that it was really all about retrieving crashed flying saucers. So that was Project Moondust. Anything you want to say about Project Moondust and Project Bluefly that Clifford Stone told you?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned them, because when I first interviewed him, he mentioned Moondust and Bluefly. And Michael, he was telling people where to go to do research. He was giving everybody the materials, but very few people went ahead and listened to him. A very sad story is that there was one of my colleagues who was doing his life story and said that basically because he was so emotional, that made him less credible. And I thought, no, everybody that's been involved in these programs gets emotional because they're reliving this. So that's when I went down there and made him talk in a tape recorder for hours, and I had it transcribed, and he's got his book, which is Eyes Only, because I realized, having talked to so many, that for people that have had contact, that have, that kind of contact, and he was military, it is an emotional issue. At the Disclosure Project, he cries. I mean, right there, he's the only one that was very, very emotional and cried about, the fact that he let a being go. And that he when he really starts crying is when he talks about the sacrifice he made with his family. So he gave us a lot of information. I'm glad you mentioned Moondust and Bluefly. I guess the next question is, what's the name of the future one? Or if it happens, then you have to look at the Brazilian case, Virginia. You have to look at other crashes, what programs there are, what they're named, and so forth. But we'll owe a lot to Clifford Stone, because he was a true courageous guy, like Colonel Corso, like Michael Wolff, like so many. Robert Dean, who was, in NATO. I mean, these guys are military people that come out and tell the truth.
So if people want to learn more about Clifford Stone, I mean, he did write a book with your help. I mean, you are, I guess, the editor of that book. So can you tell us more about his book? What's in it?
The book starts with his early life, with his psychic connection with Corona. It starts with his being invited to be in the Army, with his dealing with living in Vietnam, with the Vietnam War. And then he was also in Germany. I think he said he was asked to go to the Rendlesham Forest case in England as one of the crash retrieval situations. And he details his life and what he did. And then he has his military records in there, which everybody should see. As you said, he thought, that he was going to be a clerk, or they call him a clerk, but he had this other nuclear biological training on the side that made him do these secret projects.
Right, and this is what the military does, or the Army, or the different services do, that they give people a regular assignment, but then when they use them in these classified programs, they will send them on a temporary duty, or TDY, to do those programs. So what is it that you're doing now I know you teach courses on exopolitics, and you talk about different whistleblowers like Clifford Stone. So you want to talk to people about your courses. And I know you're going to be teaching a course in January under the Exopolitics Institute. So you want to say what it is you're teaching?
Well, right now I'm teaching a course on Hollywood and disclosure, the role of Hollywood, and Hollywood is involved. Disney was involved. And then I'm teaching a course on human type aliens, which is my favorite course, to talk about the giant rock, the early contactees, Adamski, that whole group that was contacted, and in Italy, how we were contacted through Genio Siracusa. I'm teaching that right now, Michael, but in the summertime, I'm teaching 2 other courses, and one of them might be expert witness testimony, which will include Clifford Stone. I have a Patreon channel where I chat with people, and they can go on social media, my Facebook, to see the Patreon. And then I want to start teaching master classes on what these people said. In other words, show all the video footage of what these people actually said to me. I have all this material that I have accumulated, because what's more important is you go to the source, you get it from the source. Let a Colonel Torso talk, or let a Clifford Stone talk, or a Michael Wolff. So I want to start something like that. The courses that I will be teaching for Exopolitics begin May 5th. There's a video on www.paolaharris.com made by Manuel. And I am honored to be part of that teaching situation.
Well, I know, Paola, you've been working in this field for, I think it's around 45 years now. I mean, incredible research. You've interviewed hundreds of contactees and whistleblowers. I mean, you were the person that introduced me to Alex Collier, who is a mutual friend. And you've definitely interviewed some pioneering people. Dr. Michael Wolff, very important. We can talk about him in another interview, and so many others. And I know you teach these courses for the Exopolitics Institute, Best Expert Witness Testimony, and also Messages from Space. So you're going to be teaching those in the summer semester that start on May 8. People can go to paolaharris.com to learn more about Paola and her incredible 45 years of research, and to do these courses. So I want to thank you, Paola, for coming on Exopolitics today and sharing some of your incredible experiences and firsthand knowledge and interaction with these incredible heroes in the disclosure movement.
Well, thank you, Michael. You and I have been all over the world together. Remember, we were in Italy together. And we've been friends for a long time, so it's wonderful to share research with you.
Thank you, and aloha.
Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.